1873 San Juan Mountains. Late autumn. A blue-black storm crawls over knife-edge ridgelines. Lightning forks across a dead pine, splitting it like a gallows. Below, a narrow shelf trail clings to a shale wall. A broken shoe prints panic into the scree. A raven rides the wind like a scout. Far beneath, a whitewater gorge chews a drowned wagon wheel and spits it out whole. Rowan Hale, a 26-year-old widow, is left with one mercy in the world: her husband's last horse, a rangy dun mare named Ash. At dawn, 3 riders from the Corcoran Cattle Combine steal Ash at gunpoint and burn Rowan's meager hayshed, calling her debt paid. The town priest will not intervene. The sheriff owes the Combine his badge. Alone, betrayed, with winter closing its fist, Rowan must choose: starve or run the high trails she learned as a girl in order to take back the only life she has left. She tied her boots, palmed pine pitch for grip, and vanished into the storm, because at dusk a rider appeared on the ridge, and he was no savior. Keep watching. Before night falls, we'll open a coroner's inquest that names a living man among the dead, and you'll see why one erased line in the parish register changed everything. Rowan did not cry when they took the mare. She watched the dun's ears flick toward her as the bit was jerked and the reins sawed cruel against a wet mouth. Ash's eyes tried to find her even as Ketch swung into the saddle with a lazy grin, and Boyle leaned from his own mount to toss a match into the hayshed. The straw licked up flame like a starving thing. Smoke ran low and fast across the yard. "Debt's settled," Ketch said. His teeth were tobacco brown. "Tell Lattimore if you want a receipt." The old boards popped and folded in on the winter feed. The heat got close enough to sting her shins. She stood there with a shovel and did not lift it, because 3 rifles watched her hands. When they turned to go, the dun danced and threw her head, and for a heartbeat, Rowan thought the mare might break the jaw rope and bolt. Silas Corcoran flicked his quirt under the chin and smiled. He did not ride. He was on foot, coat collar up against the cold, hat brim beaded with half-melted snow. He stood near the fence post, like a man supervising a loading crew. "Should have sold to us in July," he said. "Now the price is different." He tipped his hat with 2 fingers and let her look into his eyes long enough to know he had chosen this time of morning for the way it would feel. When they were gone, the yard felt too big. Wind chased sparks across ash and mud. Rowan stepped into the blackened spoil and kicked apart a smoldering bale with the side of her boot. Under the burnt layer, the hay was still pale. She could save a few armfuls for the milk goat if the goat made it through the next cold snap at all. She moved the meat of the bale away from the heat and thought about the mare's breath on her hands the night before, and how Ash had turned her head to look at the door as if she knew someone was coming. She thought about her husband, Eli Hale, and the last month in the parish ground, and a stone that did not warm even when the sun reached the south fence. She hiked to town before midday, with the wind at her back and the sky blowing open and shut, to show new mountains where there had been none a moment before. The mud froze around the edges and thawed in the middle. The main street of San Miguel had 2 dogs and a drunk on it, and the drunk might have been pretending. The church sat squatting, as if it did not trust the ground. Father Declan Rourke opened the door before she knocked. He smelled of beeswax and iron keys. His hair was the color of funeral candles, and his hands were chapped. "I heard," he said. "I'm sorry." He did not touch her. He stepped aside and let her into the cold nave. "I need the book," she said. "I need what you wrote." He pushed his mouth left and right, as if moving words around to straighten them. "The register is not a public ledger," he said. "It's God's record." "Then he can read over my shoulder," she said. "You put Eli down there with a date. You wrote something you didn't say. I saw you scratch in sand." "I fixed a mark," he said, too quickly. "A blot. Show me." He took her past the confessional and the little table where he kept rosaries to mending, and into the vestry where the parish book lived under oilcloth. He set it on the table and stood with one hand on it, like a man swearing an oath to himself. The binding had been resewn with a newer thread that did not match the old. He opened to the week her husband went into the ground, her name, His name, a line that wavered, as if the pen had been lifted and set down again. Beside the date, there was a faint furrow in the paper, where the nib had been pulled hard, and then the surface scraped with sand. The line next to the word burial looked a shade cleaner than the rest. She did not touch it. She said nothing for a moment, because she could feel him listening for what she would say, and she wanted that to hurt. "What did you erase?" she asked. "I corrected a misspelling," he said. "My own poor hand. You scratched out a word. I watched your wrist shake. If you're going to protect your soul, say what word it was." He closed the book again with care. "I cannot help you with men who carry rifles," he said. "You should go to Sheriff Lattimore. Sheriff Lattimore will help me the same way he helped Eli," she said, and watched his eyes. They flickered. There, a flinch the size of a blink. "I wasn't just watching your wrist," she said. "I watched him not come. I waited on a night when a man fell off the ridge, and the sheriff did not come until morning." "Go to Jonah Pike," Father Rourke said, and rubbed the bridge of his nose with a forefinger, as if he had a nail through it. "Ask him what he wrote. He writes what he sees." The undertaker's place was half shop and half silence. Jonah Pike had a pocket watch he wound, with the same care he used for lids and sutures. He looked up when she dipped into his doorway and sat on a stool without asking. He had a pen between his fingers and ink on the third knuckle where it always found him. "They took the mare," he said. "I saw them ride down the alley. I don't stand at my window like an old woman, but I happened to be. I wrote the time." "You wrote the time before," she said. "You put down when you saw him, after they fetched him up from the ravine. You wrote who signed." Jonah pulled his ledger out from its place under waxed canvas. He licked a finger and turned pages with that same peculiar gentleness undertakers have for both paper and bodies. He showed her where he had written Eli Hale, date, hour, some notes in the margin, body cold to touch, fall from height, consistent with broken neck. He had drawn a little arrow to the note where the blood under the scalp did not match the lack of scrapes. "Too clean," he said. "Neck breaks don't always look tidy, and this one did, like a man set down and then twisted, not tumbled along scree. A man would have a face full of shale if he went the whole way down. He didn't." He tapped another line. "Here, you see this name, H. Boyle, witness. Ketch also signed, and there's the sheriff's mark." "Boyle was riding roundup that night," Rowan said. "He bragged about it over beans the night before. He said he could rope a shadow. Then he wasn't at the ravine," Jonah said. "He did not lift his eyes, anyone could hear it. Or he was two places at once. If I'm generous, I say he signed in the morning, and I wrote it wrong. If I'm exact, I say I wrote what I saw when I saw it." "You wrote pencil first," she said, and pointed at where the graphite showed faint under the ink. "Then ink over it." "I write in pencil until the final viewing," he said. "Sometimes people don't stay dead in a small town if you write them too quickly." He had a way of saying something dry that sounded wet. He put the ledger back. "They want you to feel alone," he said. "You are not. I'll write anything I can swear to. That's what I can do." He wrapped the ledger in its canvas again, and for a second his hands stilled, as if something somewhere else had told him to listen. The storm had pulled itself flat against the mountain and was breathing hard up the ravines. Rowan stood and felt the boards under her boots shift, a ghost of the ridgeline under every floor in town. "I'm going up," she said. "You'll kill yourself," he said. "I'll get my horse back," she said. "And something you didn't write yet." Jonah took up his pen again and wrote a single line in the back margin of a different page, as if to test the weight of it. The scratch was soft. He did not show it to her. "Mind the shale," he said. "It moves when it looks still." She left before the dusk and climbed into country where her feet remembered what to do without asking. She knew where the shale would slide and where it would hold if she put weight like water, not a hammer. She carried no rifle. She had a knife at her hip and a coil of pigging rope across her shoulder. She palmed pine pitch from a resin seam and smeared it across her hands and the sides of her boots to grip wet stone. She tucked a twist of jerky in her cheek and let it soften while her lungs opened and burned. She moved like someone who had done this before, in a better season, with company, with laughter behind her, and a goat out front that knew the way. She thought of Tavo Redleaf then, how he had run alongside her on one foolish summer dare, both of them 14, their coats around their waists, and their cheeks hot enough to make puddles steam. He had baited her then into the chute called Martin's Rib, and later taught her the trick of listening for a different echo when the rock turned to rotten plates. She heard that echo now, and changed her line, as if it were his voice. Near the first switchback above the river, she found the arrow mark in the mud, a hunter's sign, Ute sign, for go around the trap. It was laid neat with 2 sticks like a broken V that pointed to a low scramble instead of the easy path. She went where it sent her. 20 steps later, she found the easy path scribed with a line that could have been a snare if it had been meant for rabbits, but it was thigh-high and would have caught a woman if she had hurried in fear. The loop was open, like a mouth. She cut it and tied it to a root so it would not find anyone else in the dark. She followed the prints of 3 shod horses along the talus, where the wind had not yet licked them clean. The dun had dragged a foot once, nervous, and smudged the edge of a print, a horse that knows you will fight anyway when a stranger sits her. Rowan put her hand on the ground and felt the cold of that day taking root. She heard the storm pulling itself up from the valley like a man hauling himself over a sill. She tasted metal at the back of her tongue and knew lightning was nearer. She made the next shelf and saw the outline of a rider standing with his reins slack, hat brim dipped, shoulders loose. He had Ash's bridle in his hand like a priest offering a wafer. The sky behind him peeled open and shut and turned him into a cut-paper saint with a rifle shadow across the chest. "Evening," he called. His voice had a cordial for the throat in it, a little softness, the kind that sells a lie and lets you feel polite about it. "You came quick. You came slow," she said, and did not walk toward him. "Trade," he said. "Take your mare. Hand me what you found in the ravine." He moved the bridle so the bit chimed off the ring. The sound traveled pure even through the wind. "I found mud," she said, "and you took what was alive." "Debt's debt," he said. "Silas says so. Sheriff says so. You can be poor and stubborn, or poor and alone. Alone runs worse." "Then why are you holding a bridle as if you're the good Lord?" she said. "Seems like a man with authority would have sent a boy." He laughed. It sounded wrong, like someone had written the laugh on a piece of paper, and he was reading it. "Because I like mountains," he said, "and I like watching people try to be bigger than them." He nodded to the right like a man indicating a pew. "Come take it." Rowan moved left, as if she were going to test the rock where it cracked into 2 choices. She let her right boot scuff a little so he would watch the wrong foot. She leaned into the cliff and found the thumb hold Tavo had taught her when they were children, a nut in the stone that would hold if you took it with 3 fingers, and breathed out. She slid into a chute that folded out of sight like bedclothes, pulled over a child. The shelf she left behind juddered with its own weight and broke the way pie breaks when the crust is torn by a spoon. A plate of shale cascaded where she would have been a heartbeat ago. It went past the rider's horse's legs and set the animal hopping and stamping. "Now look what you done," he said, but his voice held the first hint of a question inside it. She was gone. She dropped through a crack that smelled of wet lichen and last year's snow, then opened on the other side into a cedar hollow that had seen more deer than men. There was a woman waiting, 4 steps in, sitting on a stone like it had been her stool for many winters. Her hair was tied back in a strip of blue cloth that had faded to the color of old sky. She had a bundle beside her with roots and a small knife. Tavo slid out of the trees, the way a shadow steps forward when a lantern moves. He was taller than the boy she remembered, and his shoulders had found their final answer, but his mouth was still as quick to smile and as quick to shut when he weighed a new person. He did not smile now. "You left sign," Rowan said to him. "It saved me the snare. If you saw it, you deserved it," Aunt Selina said, and did not shift to make more room on the stone. Her eyes measured Rowan's breath, not her clothes. "You run quick," she added. "Quick is fine. Quick and blind is how you fall." "They took my mare," Rowan said. "They took a bridle too," Aunt Selina said. "Not that one," she added quickly, and lifted a hand as if to stop a thought in the air. "A different one. Our own. Rawhide with blue beads." It belongs to a story older than your road. You will bring it back, and you will not lead soldiers where they should not go. And we will let the mountain carry you instead of throw you. That is the price." "I didn't bring soldiers," Rowan said. "I brought hunger." "Soldiers follow hunger," Aunt Selina said. "They smell it on the wind like other men smell smoke." She glanced at Tavo. "Pace her," she said. "Night is cold, but thieves are colder." Tavo did not step closer. He took a breath like a man stepping into a river that might be too swift and said, "Martin's rib is rotten above the second shelf. You'll live if you treat it like eggshells." He looked at Rowan's boots, then at her hands. "Good," he said, at the pitch smeared there. "You remembered." "I remember you jumping a goat path and laughing," she said. "I don't laugh much up there now," he said. "Men put snares where the goats used to sleep. They moved along the inside edge of the ridge in a rhythm that men who ride cannot hear. It's the sound breathing makes when it agrees with a slope." Rowan found her old feet faster than grief had told her she would. Tavo did not speak unless a foothold asked for a word. He said soft, once, as the shale began to sing under their boots, and she softened. He said stop once, when a boulder above them rumbled and made up its mind. They pressed into the spine and let the stone pass with a cat's patience. The storm shook a skirt of rain in the valley and reached for them with long gray fingers and missed. They found the first hair from ash, where the trail brushed a juniper spike. A single short light hair stuck to the thorn with a little salt still dried along it. Rowan touched it, and her hands shook. "Easy," Tavo said. "You can shake later." He pointed to the old miner's ladder set into a crack, where the mountain had obliged men for a decade, and then almost forgotten them. The rungs were slick with old pitch and new ice. He set his bare foot into the first one because he had stripped his moccasins already for the feel. "Take," he said, and handed her a shorter length of rope. "Tie here," he said, and showed her a knot that would hold when pulled from below and release with a slash if the ladder broke. She tied it. He watched her knot, nodded. "You still do it left hand first," he said. It was not a fond thing or a tease, just a fact that made the past nick the present and draw a little blood. They found the cache ledge by accident and lightning. It came white and near enough to make both of them swallow air and hold it. The flash showed oilskin sacks, tucked into a rock mouth like eggs. It showed the print of Silas's boots and Mags's smaller boot. It showed a scuff where someone had slipped and then caught themselves on the lip, and it showed for a second the idea that money had weight, even on a mountain. Rowan reached with the rope because some part of her wanted to own the proof with her hands, not just her eyes. The rifle cocked behind her, and she felt the sound before she heard it. It changes the way air feels behind your neck. "Don't move," Mags Corcoran said, and it was not a bark but a plea. "Please don't move. If you slip, I have to explain that too." Rowan turned slow. Mags's hat was blown back on its stampede string, and her hair was stuck to her cheeks in little clean lines the rain had drawn. Her eyes were the same as her brother's, and not at all the same. Silas had goose eyes. Mags's were the color of the river sand when the light gets low. "It's you," Mags said, and lowered the gun a fraction. "He said you'd come up. He said you couldn't help yourself." "He said right," Rowan said. "What are you doing here?" "Trying not to drown," Mags said. "I thought money floats, but it doesn't. It pulls you right under. Take this." She lifted her chin toward the oilskin. "Take one. Take it to the court. Show it to someone who can use the law like a knife." "I can't." "You can," Rowan said. "You're standing here." Mags shook her head. "You don't know my house." She glanced at Tavo and the bridle in his hand and swallowed another hard thing. "He took something from you that wasn't his," she said. "He took something from them that wasn't ours," she said, and her mouth twitched like she wanted to spit after she said ours. "I've tried to stand in the door before. He walks through me." "You can stand in paper," Rowan said. "It holds better than a body if a man puts his hand on you." "Paper burns," Mags said. "My brother knows fire." She blew air out. "Take one sack. Take the chit," she said, and nodded toward a ragged corner of paper showing under a strap. "It's got a mark on it. R.H." Rowan eased the oilskin aside and pulled the chit. It was stiff with bear grease and damp. The initials were her husband's, written in the careful block he used when he wanted to be undeniable. The time noted did not belong to a dead man. It named hours after the fall and called them paid. He inventoried after he died, Tavo said, flat as snow. Sheriff Lattimore arrived with 2 men the mountain did not know. He did not shout. He let his badge be the first thing the storm saw, and then his hat, and then his eyes. He held his hand up with his palm bare. "Let's all be reasonable," he said. "Nobody needs to die in the rain." "You already let one," Rowan said. "I didn't let," he said, and looked wrong while he said it. "I investigated. I'm investigating now. Those sacks belong to the territory. They belong to the law," Mags said without turning. "Do you remember how to keep the law in your pocket, Amos?" He winced at his first name like it had a burr in it. "I remember how to keep the peace," he said. "Give me the sacks and the paper, and I'll take them to the magistrate. I'll put my name under a note that says I did." "You'll put your name under anything," Rowan said, and moved a half-step backward to the lip. She could not outshoot him. She could outrun him along stone if the mountain did not decide otherwise. She took the chit and smiled at him. "Come take it," she said. "Don't be foolish," he said, a father's phrase, and stepped toward her. She ran, not away from him but across him. There is a moment on a ridge where left and right stop, meaning anything, and up and down become jokes. She put her feet where shadows had been half a breath ago. She caught a tiny rib of stone with the edge of her boot and let it throw her weight forward and down and across. Lattimore reached for her and got a handful of coat. She left the coat with him. She snapped the chit out of his pocket as his hand came up to balance himself, and she was past him as he took his second breath. He made a sound like a calf that sees a brand and cannot name the feeling that comes up its throat. She landed on her left foot and took the next 3 steps the way she had when she was a girl and dared the mountain to make her something else. Coyotes screamed in the valley. One scream answered with a note humans hold when the body knows the ground is going to be where the head is. Tavo was already moving. He was there before she asked him to be there. They found Ketch at the first stair, where the trail pretended to be kind. He had fallen with his own rope coiled under him like a spilled snake. His throat had met a rock in a way that wrote an answer in blood on the shale. On his belt he carried a bridle that was not a working man's thing, rawhide with blue beads like eyes. Tavo took it with hands that knew it. He did not say anything that would have sounded like a prayer. He tied it around his waist like a belt and glanced up toward the burial cave where the wind ran, and then away again, as if pulling a curtain shut in a house that was not his. They moved Ketch's body under an overhang and left it there because something else would do the burying tonight. Mags drew up behind them with her rifle low and her mouth a hard line. "I didn't push him," she said before anyone asked. "He ran stupid. He thought the mountain would get out of his way." "The mountain doesn't," Aunt Selina said, stepping out from where the cedar reached into a seam of rock, like a hand, into a pocket. She had followed another way, known only to people who had walked there since before the church kept a book. She looked at the bridle and did not touch it yet. She looked at the sheriff and did not look long. "You will stop now," she said to him, as if speaking to a boy in a field. "I can't," Lattimore said. "I'm in it." "You can step out of it," she said. "Not clean," he said. "Clean is for newborns," she said. "Not for men." Lattimore took his hat off in the rain, like someone had told him to be polite in front of the bridle. He put it back on because the rain felt like stones now. "I'm taking these sacks," he said. "I'll put them in the court. I'll hold them till a judge comes through. That's my job. Other men can have another job. Mine is keeping the shape of things while they decide." "You lost the shape?" Rowan said. "You lost it when you signed the inquest and then left the ravine to the dark." He looked tired, not guilty, not brave, tired. "I'll do better now," he said. "It won't pay for anything, but I'll do it." "You'll lose them," she said. "I'll try not to," he said. "Sometimes try is what a man has." Tavo drew Rowan aside with a tilt of his head. "We can't fight 3 directions at once," he said. "You want your mare. Your mare goes east with Finn. We have his trail. The bridle goes home. That can buy us a path. The money will ask for blood from every side. I need the chit," she said. Everything else can be wind. You have the chit, he said. Hold it in your shirt. I'll put runners above the pass. If they push you, we open the ridge and let it sing. What does that mean? She asked. You'll hear, he said. They split then, because the mountain likes separate stories better than crowds. Aunt Selina took the bridle to a place where the stone is warm even on cold days, and where sage holds snow, like a mother holds a baby that will not wake. Tavo went with her long enough to tie a promise to a root. Rowan went where the dun's hoof had scuffed a little spray of wet rock across a dry one. The storm pulled her hood off twice, and she put it back on twice, and then let it go, because it caught more wind than it kept rain off. She moved through a stand of aspen that had lost all their leaves in one moment, like a town emptying for a fire. She heard hooves then, on something that wasn't trail. It had that hollow drum of a horse, wondering if the land means it. She called once, low, from the throat. It was the old call she used when Ash was a filly and would not let the bit sit. Nothing. She called again, and put a note in it only the mare would care about. The wind swallowed it, and then returned it to her like a borrowed thing. Out of the dark, a figure took shape that she wanted to be a tree, and was not. Silas Corcoran sat his horse as if it were a chair, and rain meant nothing to him. He had a slicker that shone the way oil shines when water tries to make a friend. You climbed, he said, as if reading a grocery list. How fast can you come down? Faster than you, she said. He smiled and did not look at her with his eyes. He looked at her hands. You have something of mine. I have something you want to be yours, she said. Same thing, he said. Let's not pretend we're in court. We're in the weather. It likes me. He looked at the ridge above her. Bring me the paper and take your horse and go get warm. Be smart. You staged a fall, she said. You staged it to cover a payroll. You put Boyle's name on a night he was 20 miles away. The priest scratched out a word he wrote because you made him shake. I can name the hour and the hand. Don't ask me to pretend. I don't, he said. I ask you to be tired. Tired people give up things in the rain. He leaned forward so the brim of his hat shed water, like a gutter. I like the way you run, but running doesn't change what a badge can do to a ledger. Jonah Pike did not know he would be called again. He was already lighting his lamps and closing his shop against wind. He had written one more line in the ledger after Rowan left. He had written it because he had not been able to stop his hand. He had written, in small letters, the name of a man who was not dead, and then struck it halfway and left the other half to show through. He did not understand why he had done that, and he did not like it. He blew on the ink to dry it, and heard boots in the alley. He blew again, because he was a careful man, and then he put the ledger in its box. There is a particular sound a county seal makes when it is taken from a drawer by someone's hand. He heard that sound now, and knew Sheriff Lattimore was at his door. Open, Lattimore said, and used the voice of a man who would rather be someone else. You don't need me, Jonah said. You need paper. I need both, Lattimore said, and I need you to sit with a justice of the peace and Father Rourke in the morning and read a name out loud, without looking at me, to see if I flinch. He stopped. He looked down at his own boots, as if they had made a mess. I wrote something I didn't file, he said. Rourke was there. He knows. I'm going to say so out loud, too. You should have in summer, Jonah said. I'm doing it now, Lattimore said. He looked older than the storm. Men don't get summer twice. Rowan did not give Silas the chit in the rain. She walked backward along the rib until the mountain narrowed enough that a horse would have to choose between pride and survival. She saw Finn's shape behind Silas, flickering, and Boyle's somewhere higher, like a bird that would not land. She put her back to a wall that was not really a wall, just the idea of one, and she slid into it until rock pressed her spine. She said very softly, not to Silas, not to herself, but to the storm, I will take back what's mine. Then take it, a voice to her left said, and it was Tavo's. She had not seen him walk into the rock. He had found the old goat path that cut under the shelf, the one you cannot see unless the light lies to you. He put a hand on her arm and put 2 fingers to his lips and let out a whistle that slid under the storm like a knife under fat. It was the whistle they used for goats when they wanted the animals to thread a needle of rock. It was also a whistle a horse might heed, if the mare loved a sound more than she feared a man. Across the ravine, faint as a thought, a dun mare answered, one quick, low nicker that reached through wind by luck or memory. Rowan felt it in the bones of her face. Silas heard it too. He leaned harder on his reins. Like that could keep the world steady. Call again, he said. I wasn't the one. Calling, Rowan said. Lightning walked and took 3 long steps over the ridge. For a beat, every shadow had a twin, and the mountain showed its teeth. Finn shifted his rifle against his thigh. This is nothing, he said to Silas, and he did not sound sure. She'll fall. She won't, Silas said, and also did not sound sure. Rowan slid sideways and found the invisible path with the side of her boot. She dropped to it and felt the shelf move and settle like a tired animal. She ran the next 12 steps with her hands pressed to the stone, the way women press handkerchiefs to their mouths at funerals. She reached the little notch where you can stand and hear your own heart and let it slow, and she did not slow. She let it pound through the rock and into the floor of the whole mountainside. It was a signal Tavo could hear under his feet, and he answered with 2 taps of his heel, then another. Over their heads, on the rim, 3 runners answered in the old way, by knocking stone against stone, with a rhythm that tells other listeners where to look and where not to. They came out into a pocket, where the wind circled and laughed, and did not touch the ground. Rowan could smell horse there, old and new. She could smell the iron of the bit and the grass from a pasture 2 days ago, and the fear that makes horse sweat go sweet. She put 2 fingers in her mouth and whistled the sharp, quick call that had taught Ash to come when she was a weanling, and the big geldings shoved her off the grain. The whistle cut and slid and cut again. A dark shape moved around a boulder, like a thought around a problem. The mare's ears pricked forward until they were small sails. She hesitated because a rope hung loose at her chest, and somebody had put a knot in it that told her to think or die. Rowan squatted and put her hands flat on her knees and made herself small, the way a person does when a feral cat needs to remember a hand once meant good. Ash, she said, come on, it's me. The wind took most of it away, but left enough. The mare came 3 steps and stopped with her front feet on a rock that had a name once in some miner's mouth. She blew hard enough to lift Rowan's hair. She stretched her neck and touched Rowan's palm with a lip. The lip trembled. The rope dragged between them like a bad idea, left over from somebody else. Rowan took it in her fingers and did not pull. She laid the rope over the mare's crest, the way you lay a blanket over a sleeping child. Good, she said. Good girl. The mare lowered her head and half closed one eye, because she knew that voice, before she knew anything else today. Silas saw this birth of a new thing he could not keep, and he did the thing men do when they cannot keep something. He spurred his horse and tried to force the trail to widen for him. The mountain respected the horse more than the man, and gave both the answer it gives. The shale under his near fore ripped out like fabric torn from a coat. The geldings scrabbled and threw cinders. Silas held his seat because he had been born with a seat, and then made it. He reached for the wall with his free hand, and Rowan watched his fingers close on nothing. She saw his eyes find hers then, in that wobbly moment when people look for a witness, the way they look for a handrail. She looked back and did not offer a hand. The man chose, not the mountain. He chose to pull his horse back and live, and he did. He hauled the gelding's shoulders into a stubborn hop that saved them both. His hat went. His face showed what he carried. It wasn't fear. It was fury with a cold spoon under it. Rowan took Ash's mane and stepped into the space that had been a trap and was now a place where she belonged. She slid onto the mare's bare back because there was no time for saddles or rightness. She hooked her knees and felt the old back under her, the sway she knew, the way the mare always laid her ears back 1 degree when someone cursed too loud. Home, she said, and meant any place that wasn't this shelf with these men. She put her head low against the mare's neck and squeezed, and Ash moved like a shadow that has decided what it wants. Lattimore made his choice on a different shelf. He took 2 sacks and left 3, because the weight told him which ones he could carry and still stand with his knees. He was not a greedy man, and he was not a brave man. He was a man who wanted to still have both feet at the end of a day. He told his deputies to wait, and then told them again, because they were looking at the money the way men look at a woman too long. He told himself mid-sentence that he would not lose these into a hole somewhere. He would not. He liked to think it, even if liking to think it was not the same as doing the thing. Aunt Selina took the bridle into her lap in the hush behind the burial cave and began to unbraid its story with her thumbnails. People who do not know think a story is in the beads. It is in the joints. She felt where some man had tightened new strands to an old throat. She hummed not a song but a sound, without words that lives around and under songs. "You bring this home now," she said to the bridle. "Don't drag anybody in with you," she told it, like telling a child who is good whenever someone is watching. "Be only yourself." Night blew close as a horse's flank. Rowan put her hand in the mare's mane and let itself tell her the way. Tavo ran in front of them for 20 strides, and then behind for 40, and then somewhere above that she could not see. She felt the mountain under her, like a chest under a blanket. She heard Finn somewhere, and could not tell if he was coming or going, but she knew he had lost the easy parts of himself. When they reached the dry lip that looks like a throat where water runs when it chooses, Rowan slowed the mare to a walk. She slid off because she could carry herself better than the horse could carry both of them along a particular blade of rock. She found the whistle again and let it sit low in her mouth like a small coin. She put her palm on the mare's shoulder and felt a tremor there, like the animal was sorting through the day. "We're good," she said. "We're good because we say so." Finn's shape came up behind them like a rumor getting legs. He had his rifle in his hand as if the weight helped him think. "You put that mare and that paper down now," he called. Too loud for the shelf, and he knew it. "We end it. We go home." He did not say whose home. He did not say who went first. Rowan turned to face him and felt the shelf under her heel shift one whisper. She didn't step back. She lifted the chit so it caught a skitter of lightning and held it where he could see the grease and the initials. "This says a dead man worked for an hour," she said. "You want to shoot at something that true." Finn lifted the rifle then, not to fire, but because his hands needed something to do. He blinked. He had water in his eyes that was not rain. "Everything is true if you keep saying it," he said. "My father taught me that." "Then your father lied a lot," she said. Ash tossed and struck her forefoot at the shale so it rang like a bell. The sound carried. Up the ridge, 3 answering chips came back, stone knocking stone. It was not music. It was a map. Finn's head snapped toward it, because it reached down in his ear to where boys keep their animal sense. He took a step the wrong way. The shelf trembled and held. He took another, and the shelf did not hold. He sat down fast, like he meant to, but he had not. His heels found nothing. He put his palms on rock and found only what a man finds when he puts a hand on a lie. Rowan reached out purely because a body will do that when another body goes away. She did not touch him. Tavo grabbed Finn's collar and dragged him 2 breaths back to where a person is a person again, and not a bag of meat. Finn lay with his eyes open and looked at the sky with an expression like someone had told him a story he didn't remember asking for. "Go," Tavo said to Rowan, and there was no more long word in it, just urgency shaved to the bone. Now, he'll live enough to hate it. Silas is moving the valley mouth. He'll burn what he can reach. Rowan put her cheek to Ash's neck and breathed into the hair there and let it wake something in both of them that had been asleep since summer. She swung up, and the mare stepped quick and sure and no longer uncertain. She ran the rib that had broken other men, and it held under hooves because the animal's weight knows where to go when the person on her back is old as that place. In another way. Down in town, Jonah set his lamps lower because he could feel the storm deciding whether it wanted to tear or only frighten. He took the parish register out of its oilskin because Father Rourke had asked him to keep it safe for one night. For no reason he would write. He set both books on his table and sat between them like a man sitting between 2 women who both want to be right. He opened the inquest again and traced the pencil under the ink with his fingernail, light as breath. He thought about the word a priest might have scratched, and the line he himself had written that made his heart stutter when he looked at it. He was not a coward, and not a hero. He was a man who wrote things down. He looked up when the door rattled hard enough to threaten the hinge. He stood without making a decision. The door opened, and Sheriff Lattimore came in wet as a dog that has failed to outrun a river. Behind him, Father Rourke stepped in, hatless, hair flat to his head, eyes deep in his face. "We'll do it now," Lattimore said. "Before dawn. Dawn is when paper looks braver," Rourke said. "Now," Lattimore said, and put the sacks on the table like meat. One had broken and leaked coins, and two had not. He could not help looking at the break like a wound he had made, and could not stop making. "Read," he told Jonah. "Read what you have. Then ask me what I wrote and didn't file. Ask him what he scratched and why." Rowan did not know any of that yet. She had the mare under her, and the chit against her ribs, and the storm at her back. She had the shape of Silas and Boyle and Finn, trying to find a way up, without having to pay for it, with more than breath. Ahead, the valley mouth glowed the color fires do when they eat brush rather than boards. She thought of Aunt Selina's words, and of bones that should not see the open air, and of runners tapping stone to say go left when your heart wants to go right. She thought of how hunger moves men who wear blue coats and carry papers, and she thought of the word murder scratched out of a book by a hand that shakes. She did not plan. She ran. Rowan kept the mare to the shadow side of the ridge and angled for the draw that curved like a cupped hand round the old cliff homes. The wind chased her, and then lost patience and rushed past to bully some other part of the mountain. Ash moved with her ears half back, listening to Rowan's breath. At the lip above the dwellings, the stone turned slick with storm spit, and the mare's near hind slid, then found purchase, because Rowan loosened her knees and let the animal choose. A flash of mirror light winked from the far slope, 3 quick glints. Not lightning. Tavo's people were speaking in the old way. She answered with the smallest lift of her knife, no more than a thin tongue of reflection, laid back into the dark. The light died. Thunder walked off to count somewhere else. In the pocket of the cliff, the air went still and close, and smelled of old smoke and dried sage bundles, and the great wall with its window eyes watched her, as if the dead had not left so much as moved their chairs. Aunt Selina stood in the mouth of the first dwelling, with the bridle laid across her forearms, like a book. The blue beads did not shine. They held their color tight, as if light had to prove itself. She looked at the mare, then at Rowan, then at the chit tucked under Rowan's shirt, where the damp had warmed it. "You took back what was yours," she said. "Now try to keep it." Her gaze went up and over Rowan's shoulder, to the valley mouth where a smear of orange grew like lichen. "They'll burn you out," Rowan said. "They'll try," Aunt Selina said. "We were here before fire. We know how to walk around flame without giving it our names." She reached and touched Ash's forehead, as if finding out what kind of prayer the animal could hold. Ash leaned her weight to that hand, the way a tired child leans without meaning to. "Good," Aunt Selina said, and then turned to Tavo. "Bring the runners in tight. The sheriff carries sacks like a man who cannot count. He will make noise enough to wake fools." She put the bridle down on a woven mat and began to sort its strands, like a woman untangling hair after a day of dust. Her thumbs found a hard place hidden under rawhide where someone had knotted wrong in a hurry. She clicked her tongue once and undid it without looking. "When you are ready to speak to paper," she said to Rowan, "speak, but speak to stone first. It does not change its mind while you talk." Rowan slid off Ash and left the mare with her head low, blowing gently through her nostrils at the cave's cool damp. Her knees trembled when her boot soles found the ground again, and she let them tremble. She let herself shake like a tree shakes a last leaf, and felt stronger after. She took water from a clay jar and rinsed the grit out of her teeth and the iron taste out of the back of her throat. Tavo watched the mouth of the cleft and counted between lightning and thunder under his breath, not because the gap told him anything he didn't already know, but because the count gave his hands something to do besides itch for a rope he could throw around a man's neck. In town, the lamps made small gold boats on the undertaker's table. Lattimore stood with his badge darkened to pewter by wet, and Father Rourke kept one hand on the parish book, as if that might keep the past from getting up and walking around the room. Jonah Pike read in the quiet voice he saved for last viewings. He read the inquest as he had written it, and made no apology for the places where pencil shadow showed under the ink. He put his finger beside the name H. Boyle and said, "Witness," and then, because saying witness to a lie felt worse than saying nothing, he added, "Unverified." He turned a page with the same fingers he used to close eyelids. "The fall was too clean," he said again, "not to accuse, not to convince, but to lay down the same line, so it would be there, when men came later, to measure their own words against it." Lattimore set one sack closer to the ledger and did not look at the coins that had leaked out of the torn one, like teeth from a kicked-in mouth. "I wrote a deposition," he said. He pulled a folded paper from his inside pocket, and it had already lost its crispness to the rain. "I wrote it because Silas brought me to the ravine and said the man was drunk, and I believed him because believing him meant I could sleep. I did not file it because I had dreams." He put the paper down and slid it toward Jonah. "I will file it now as evidence of what I was going to do and did not. You can take that, however suits you." Father Rourke stared at the white place in his own book where he had scraped a word away and felt that scraped place in the middle of his chest. "I struck out the word murder," he said finally, as if saying it made it freeze and stop wriggling. "I did it because I thought if I wrote it down, the valley would burn, and the army would come, and our children would eat ash with their breakfast. I did it because I was afraid. I can copy the page again and leave it as it was, if a man with authority tells me to." His voice had shaved itself down until there was almost nothing left to cut. He folded his hands like he thought they might shake if he let them be alone. Jonah wrote one more small line beneath the margin note he had already written, and he wrote it in a way that could be read without his presence. He did not say it out loud. He put a blotter on it and looked at the sheriff. "Bring a justice," he said. "Bring the woman. Bring the paper. We'll sit at dawn and do it where the living can hear." He did not add, "if there is a dawn and if the mountain allows." The window rattled on its hinge like a tooth, and he thought of men who threaten fire when they have not yet learned what fire costs. At the cliff dwellings, Aunt Selina put the bridle over her knee and pulled the last knot free. She lifted it so the beads lay even instead of bunched. Her face softened the way weather does just before it breaks. "You see," she said to Tavo, without looking at him, "I told you it would come back if you asked it right." He did not answer, because he knew she had not really spoken to him. She hung the bridle on a peg, carved 5 handspans above the floor, where the smoke would take its memory into the roof and make it part of the house. "Now run in the other direction," she said to Rowan, and tipped her chin toward the valley mouth, where the glow thickened. "Go where men have made the wrong fire, and put it out with fear." Rowan tightened the mare's jaw rope with fingers that felt stupid for the first time that day. She had been smooth on the ridge. Now the thought of men pushing Flame toward the burial cave made her hands clumsy. She cursed softly at herself, and then laughed once without humor, because she had cursed the wind for being the wind. "We won't lead anyone to you," she said to Aunt Selina. "You do not lead anyone who already knows the way," Aunt Selina said. "You just get out of the way." They moved out through a crack that had swallowed generations and left them to stew in the cool like tea leaves in a jar. Tavo took the outer edge and counted his steps without moving his mouth. Rowan kept the mare in the lee and listened for the low rattle to her left that meant a tumble might begin there. She would press right when she heard it and trust the horse to trust her. They crossed a seam of red stone that made every hoof ring, and the sound went out into the night like coins knocked together in a purse. It made the hair lift on her neck, even though the men ahead could not possibly hear it through their own racket. Silas had squared men across the valley mouth like a gate made of soft wood. He had 5 besides Boyle, and 2 of them were boys who had learned to spit at 16 and to be bored at 17. He held a torch in his left hand and a carbine in his right, and he did not look like a man who would tire before he got what he wanted. He had already thrown brush against the lower mouth of the cliff, and the fire took all too gladly, because the brush had been waiting all summer for its first real reason. It climbed low, snaking the way flames do when they like a rock face and want to taste it. Boyle strutted with a second torch and made a show of holding it too close to his own boot and then laughing at the boys when they jumped. "Scared," he said, and the word found its way back to him a few seconds later, in 3 voices, all of them his own, thrown off the cliff. The first mirror flash from the ridge cut through the firelight and made the men blink as if morning had found them too soon. Then another flash and another from another angle. Silas reined up and stared up into the teeth of the mountain. The flashes were too bright for lamps, too sharp for lightning. They did not belong to townfolk. "They're playing," Boyle said, dislike crawling into his voice like vermin. "Stupid." He lifted his torch and waved it in big circles, painting the cliff with light. Rowan tucked Ash into the thin darkness behind a boulder and slid off. She unhooked the coil of pigging rope and tied a loop quick, faster than the ache in her fingers wanted her to. "You throw," Tavo whispered, and it was not a suggestion or an insult. It stated the fact he had seen the summer she had learned. She nodded and weighted the loop with a pebble and counted wind under her breath and tossed. The loop took a breath of its own and flew at the torch. Boyle flung too high in a show-off arc. It dropped over the flame and pulled it down and slapped it against stone. Boyle yelped and let go and clapped a palm to his wrist, where a lick of fire kissed him. The torch hissed in wet sand and went black. The boys derided him under their breath in their little secret way, the little way that drives men to veer into danger, to punish children. Silas swore and wheeled his horse once to face the cliff dwellings, once to face the mouth. He chose to be a man of the wide place rather than the wall. "Find me that woman," he said to the 2 boys. "Find me the priest's pet ledger man. Find me anybody who thinks paper is rock." He handed his torch to the taller boy and took the other's rifle. He sighted up into darkness and fired once, twice, at nothing in particular, and at everything in general. The shots walked up the cliff and chipped, and then were done. He did not hit a runner. He hit a mirror. The glass cracked and fell and made a beautiful sound, like ice, at the very beginning of spring. The mountain did not answer out loud, but the wind did a private little dance that made the men shift in their saddles. Rowan slid along the wall with the mare's lead rope looped twice around her hand and found the place where the brush had been laid thick. She did not stamp the fire out with her foot, because that's how a person writes a burn on their own skin. She dragged a wet blanket someone had hung to dry earlier and slung it over the low run of flame and heard it swear and die. She pulled the blanket back and repeated the work 3 hands farther. The blanket smoked black like a story being told wrong. She did it again. Silas shouted for men to spread and failed to hear his own voice come back to him before his words were finished. Boyle ran toward the cave and smacked a spark into his own sleeve with the back of his hand and cursed God, and then cursed darker things because it made him feel bigger, 2 inches taller, in the dark. Aunt Selena's voice came from behind the smoke, low, not scolding, not sweet, instructive as a winter morning. "You will not put fire on the bones," she said, and whoever carried the match in that moment felt his hands sleepy. He could not get them to move like he wanted. He dropped the match, and it went out because his fingers had found snow he hadn't seen. He stared at his hand and felt 3 years younger, the moment before he learned to be cruel because the world told him to. He shook it off and ran the other direction, because boys scare easy in 2 directions at once. Lattimore made the edge of the valley with his 2 sacks and his 2 deputies, who were breathing hard and regretting nothing. He saw the glow and knew what it meant and did not accelerate. He slowed, as if approaching a sick bed. "Put those down," he said, and the deputies did not hear him because the light had a sound and it filled their ears. He said it again, and the taller one turned his head. like he might, and then did not. Lattimore raised his voice to the old parade ground pitch he had learned before the badge. "Put those down," he said, and this time they obeyed, because men do obey sometimes, when a voice hits a particular bell in them that has not rusted through. They set the sacks at the base of a pinion and stood up empty-handed and confused, and their eyes looked young. Lattimore drew his pistol and held it low by his knee and cursed softly at his own right hand for wanting to shake again. "We're not here for that," he told the deputies, and he did not say what that was. Rowan felt Ash's shoulder tighten under her hand. The mare had heard something she could not say. Rowan turned her head and saw Silas in the half-light with his carbine at a low angle and his eyes on the cave mouth. He wanted to force her to choose. He wanted to make her run toward the burial place and bring her trouble with her. She stepped out instead, into the light, into the awful honesty of it. "Here I am," she called. "Leave the dead alone and come try me." It pulled him like meat pulls a dog. He swung to her, and that saved the mouth of the cave for 1 minute longer. Boyle, stung and pride-punched, came at a run with a new torch and no plan. He raised it high over his head because he still believed the sky liked him, and he brought it down toward her face, like he was going to institutionalize victory on paper. Rowan ducked and smashed the torch wrist with the flat of a rock she had ready in her left hand. The torch spun 10 feet and landed handle first in a patch of sand and stuck there like a flag planted by an idiot. Boyle howled and felt two bones argue under his skin. He swung with his left and caught a handful of Rowan's hair and yanked and got nothing but wet strands in his fingers. And the feeling men dislike more than pain, being smaller in front of someone they meant to make smaller. Ash surged as if she had not been taught better, and Rowan slapped her shoulder without looking and said, "Stay," in the voice animals understand. The mare stayed because the world made sense when Rowan sounded like that. Tavo came in low, with his shoulder to Boyle's hip, the way wrestlers use when they don't want to give men time to think. He took Boyle down to his knees, and then left him there, and moved on. He did not grind anyone's face in the dirt. He was thinking about the bridle on the peg, and of smoke going the wrong way. Silas raised his carbine, and could have shot the runner in the back then. He did not, because Lattimore called his name, once, with the old friend note in it men use right before they show teeth. Silas turned his head, like a wolf turns his head. When another wolf makes a sound, he recognizes from a pup day. He sneered when he saw the sheriff. "Come to sign something," he said. "Come to stop something that will eat us," Lattimore said. "Put your fire down." "What fire?" Silas said, and grinned, and while his mouth grinned, his eyes flicked to the brush, to Rowan, to the hill, where mirrors had died. He wanted to be 3 places. He was one. A gust shoved flame harder toward the cave opening. Rowan jumped to it and flung the blanket again, and felt her wrist bark under the weight and heat. A spark leapt the blanket and landed in dry grass, where no one had stomped yet. It took with a low, pleased sound. Tavo swore, an old word that tasted like old teeth. He grabbed the burning tuft with bare hands and smothered it against his own chest and hissed through his teeth and let it leave a black print on his shirt and not on the ground. He flung the dead thing aside. He looked up at the rock above the cave mouth and saw it move the way chest bone moves when a sleeping person changes sides. "Out," he said, to Rowan, to Aunt Selina, to the air. "Out now." Aunt Selina did not move fast. She picked up the bridle from the peg with both hands and held it against her sternum so hard the beads pressed half-moons into her skin, through her shirt. Then she moved like water, not like a woman trying to be water, but like water itself, choosing the easy path and making it easier. She came out into the world and did not look back to see if smoke followed. She looked at Silas and his men and said, "You chose an old enemy." Her voice had no curse in it, and that made the hair on the back of one boy's neck stand up. Silas saw the bridle and smiled, because he had nothing left to hope for but salvage. "Give me that," he said. Aunt Selina looked at him as at a little boy who has taken the last biscuit on purpose and does not know it will rot his mouth. "No," she said. She did not shout. She placed the bridle in Rowan's hands the way someone places a baby whose breathing lags in the night. Hold, she said. If you drop it, the mountain will take both of you because it will think you are the same. Rowan held. The rawhide felt warm and old and heavy enough to put her shoulder down. She did not know what to do with it. She held, because that was the instruction she had been given. The mirror flashes started again from upridge, a run of quick, blinding stamps that stitched left to right and back again. Silas flinched and his horse humped. He snapped at himself for flinching and overcorrected, and turned his horse too sharply, and that set the near hind to skating. He dragged it back under him and swore at the animal for being a horse. He raised his carbine again and aimed and did not fire, because the world shifted in a way you do not ignore. The whole shelf above them shrugged, the way a big body does before it throws something off its shoulder. Tavo heard it coming and didn't bother looking up because eyes were too slow for the sound. He lunged for the edge and shoved Rowan sideways out of any path something heavy might find, and then the rock came. It did not fall like a wall. It came in rivers, in chunks that rolled and leapt and multiplied themselves by breaking. The first two slabs sheared off from a seam 30 feet up and bounced against the lip and leapt like dogs and hit low, punching air out of men and fire out of the brush. Then the tail of the slide came, the fast, dirty hunger that carries everything small and does not care what it is. Tavo saw the first slab in time to choose. He grabbed a boy by the collar, the shortest one, the one whose voice had cracked last week, and flung him backward out of the direct line. The boy hit his spine and slid and lived. Tavo turned to jump, and a couch-sized slice of ancient stone caught him in the hip and spun him under its belly and pinned him on the edge of the mouth as if some mean god had meant to nail him there. Rowan went to him without thinking. Ash reared and struck at a rock the way a mare strikes at a dog. The rock did not care. Aunt Selina took the mare's rope and anchored the animal to a bush in one motion, because an animal with terror and love in it can kill a person by trying to help. Rowan tried to lift the stone with both arms, and with her mouth, and with her back, and with the sound she made that wasn't a word. The rock moved the way a memory moves, one finger's width, and then none. No, Tavo said, and the word came like someone blowing out a candle, so it would not burn the curtain. Not that way. You'll wear yourself out in the first minute, and then the mountain wins. How then? She said, and grit filled her teeth, so it sounded like she was biting something she couldn't chew. Dig, he said, the underside, where it kisses me. He drew breath through his nose like a man about to take a punch, because there was too much dust to mouth breathe. And wedge, with a smaller thief, he added, and his mouth tried to turn up even as the pain put both hands on his chest. Little rocks make big rocks behave. She dug. Her nails bloodied themselves against the coarse edge, and then flattened, and did not wait for her permission. She scooped with both hands, and with a flat shard of roofstone, and with the heel of her palm, she found the underside where the new brokenness had left grit loose. She made a trough to somewhere, anywhere, a dark space that would receive a breath or a toe. Aunt Selina slid on her knees in next to her and used her own strong hands, with no comment and no demand. The two deputies stumbled forward, finally themselves again, under the weight of what sound had ended. Lattimore barked at them to keep away from the lip, and then crawled in anyway, because a man who has spent a night admitting small ugliness sometimes wants to earn himself an hour of decent daylight. Silas backed his horse 2 lengths and let other bodies stand between him and the thing he had started. Boyle got to his feet to feel important, and his bad wrist sent him a message he could not ignore. He climbed to the side with his torch and waved it like a baton, commanding nobody. He shouted, "Watch for another," as if he were not the reason this one had happened. Aunt Selina shoved 2 stones into a gap and wrenched a third to meet them, so the 3 made a promise to each other to be strong. Rowan dug her hands under the stone until skin screamed, and then stopped screaming and simply shuddered now and then, as if to mark time. "Breathe," she said to Tavo, and she did not sound like a woman begging a man to live. She sounded like a clock, telling a child they would be late for church. Breathe when I tell you. Push when I tell you. Don't when I tell you not. He smiled then, properly, because he remembered being 14 and swearing at her for that same tone above Martin's rib. Bossy, he said, and then coughed once hard enough to paint a red line at the corner of his mouth. All so pretty. He shut his eyes while she dug, because it let him put his mind somewhere else, somewhere with goats and bread. Do not let him see you, he added, and his eyes flicked, just once toward Silas. I won't, she said. I'm busy. Lattimore jammed a pry bar he had not had a moment ago into a seam and put his shoulder to the steel, and the sinew in his neck stood up. On 3, he said, and then did not count, because he heard the shape of the rock change, and numbers would have lied. He pushed when the stone said, push me, and the 2 deputies cried out, and put their hands under, and lifted too soon, and had to try again. The slab shifted the way a stubborn door gives, when a second hand finds the right place. A little of Tavo's breath came back at once, in a sound that frightened Rowan, because it sounded like the end, and like the start all at once. They got him free enough to pull. They did not. Tavo stopped them with a groan that almost made Aunt Selina slap him quiet. Wait, he said. Not my leg. The bones will argue if you drag. He swallowed. Cut my boot. Leave it to the mountain. He did not say please. He made it a plan, so no one would waste strength on doubt. Rowan took her knife and slit the boot leather from knee to toe in one long insult to a good piece of work, and peeled it back, and saw how wrong a shin looks when it stops being itself. She did not blanch. She panted like a dog, and put her hands where he told her to, and they slid him out into the world. He fainted then, not in a pretty way, not like ladies in books. He went gray and slack, and his mouth fell open, and Aunt Selina put the bridle under his head for a pillow, and Rowan said, no, that's for a story, and Aunt Selina said, this is the story, and left it. Silas found his face again, while other people worked, and put it on like a shirt. He lifted his carbine and sighted along it, and chose Lattimore's shoulder, and then chose Jonah's eye, and then chose Rowan's back, because that would write the loudest word. Father Rourke stepped into his line, out of nowhere, priest black soaked to charcoal, eyes grand with some new horrible courage and some old sadness. Don't, he said to Silas. It was not a threat. It was not a prayer. It was the kind of instruction men fail to obey for 2 seconds, and then obey, because the 2 seconds show them exactly what comes next. Silas lowered the carbine 1 inch, and then raised it again, because he could not stand that inch. Rowan felt him decide 2 heartbeats, before he squeezed, and she threw herself over Tavo's chest without grace. The shot cracked, and hit stone, and spat off into the night. The mare screamed, because the sound ran up her legs and she felt trapped by a rope that was love. Aunt Selina stood finally and lifted her chin and looked at Silas Corcoran like a woman looks at a snake on her kitchen floor. You are done here, she said. The mountain has already decided to take your brother's son someday for what you started. I would talk it out of that if I could. I cannot. Now go. Silas laughed, but it was brittle. It came apart in his mouth and stuck in his teeth. You don't tell me where to go, he said. We do, said another voice, and it belonged to the youngest deputy, the one with dust on his ear and fear still hot in his chest. He had found himself in the moment dust lifted and discovered he did not like who he had been an hour before. We do, he said again, surprised to hear himself use the we of men who stand. Lattimore put his hand on the boy's sleeve, not to silence, but to say good. The fire at the cave entrance gave up its last idea and lay down like a dog told to, its breath still hot, but its will gone. The smoke thinned. The valley mouth stank like anger. Rowan cut a strip from the hem of her skirt and bound Tavo's shin as best she could, without moving bone, and Aunt Selina brewed something from a pouch she wore at her belt and pressed it to his lips when he came back enough to swallow. He gagged and then swallowed again, because she told him to. You will sleep like a man who ran 100 miles, she said to him, and you will wake like a man who must walk one. She looked up at Rowan and saw the chit pressed against her ribs through the wet shirt, and nodded once. "You carry paper like a heart," she said. "Now carry it where hearts are counted." Rowan stood on legs that were done for the day, and told them they were not. She tied the mare's rope to her belt, so the animal would follow her without thinking, and so Rowan would not think without the animal. She looked at Lattimore, and then at Jonah, who had arrived without her seeing him, and at Father Rourke, who had wiped ash off his hands onto his sleeves in 2 long stripes, like a penitent who did not know the right ritual. "We go now," she said. "We sit the inquest before men sleep again, and tell themselves a different story." Lattimore nodded. His mouth worked around a thanks that would have tasted wrong, and settled on, "I'll clear the room." He told his deputies to gather the sacks, and then he stopped them with a lifted finger and said, "Leave them here tonight. They sleep in the mountain." He looked surprised at his own sentence, and then believed it. "We'll fetch them with a dozen witnesses when it's light." Silas sneered, and opened his mouth, and then shut it, because the words that wanted to come would fall out like teeth. He kicked his horse in a tight circle and rode for the outer trail, where he could be alone with the piece of himself that had never had to share his body with doubt. Rowan put a hand to Tavo's shoulder as he slept, a quick palm that said, "Stay," then took it away because staying was not hers to give. Aunt Selina brushed Rowan's cheek with the back of her fingers, as if wiping away a spider web the night had placed there while she worked. "Bring back a piece of paper that does not lie," she said. "Then bring me something that bleeds for supper." Her mouth twitched. "Rabbit will do." They went down by the old freight road, because the ridge would have eaten any man who tried it in the tail of a storm. Ash picked her way with that dance good horses have, mare and woman sharing thoughts, without the fuss of words. Lattimore walked with his pistol in his belt, and his empty hands open, as if to show the dark he wasn't here to take. Jonah walked with the parish register under his arm, and his ledger in a satchel, and his shoulders level, like the scale he knowingly was. Father Rourke walked with nothing in his hands for the first time in months, and did not know what to do with them. He tucked them into his sleeves, and then took them out again, and let them hang, and either way, he felt the wind pick his coat and say, "This is how light you are." The courthouse was a square box that looked ashamed of itself. Lattimore found the justice of the peace asleep on a cot in the back room, and roused him with the last of his good voice. The man woke with a cough and a desire to be anywhere else, and then remembered he liked the sound of himself making decisions. He passed a hand down his beard to lay authority across his chin, and went to sit at the desk with the best lamp. Jonah laid the ledger open like a patient on a table. Father Rourke set the parish register beside it, and did not touch it again, until asked. Rowan pulled the oil-stained chit from her shirt, and set it center, on the scarred wood, and every man in the room looked at it as if it could wink. "State what you saw," the justice said, and his voice came out like an old door, finding itself open for spring. He nodded at Jonah. "You first." Jonah read, not the way he had in his shop. He read now for men who would try to wriggle through any gap they could find in a line. He gave times. He gave weather. He gave the lay of the ravine. He gave the pencil before the ink and the ink after the pencil. He gave what Boyle had said, within his hearing, and he gave the shrug Lattimore should not have given, and was now giving back. He read his margin note at the end, and watched Lattimore's mouth tighten, and then relax. He did not look at Rowan while he read, because he did not need to find strength there or lend it. "Father," the justice said, as if calling a man to breakfast, not to judgment, and Father Rourke stepped forward like a man who has decided to go wherever he is sent today. He laid his hand on the page he had scraped and said, "I wrote the word murder here, and then scraped it out. I did it with my right hand, and shame sat on my wrist to help. I thought it would save fire. It lit another kind." The justice swallowed because he had expected a dance, and had been given plain bread. "Thank you," he said, and meant it. "Sheriff," the justice said, and Lattimore did not wait to be asked to swear. He swore before anyone could correct him, and then swore again, because he had wanted to the first time, and had not been permitted. He said he wrote a deposition to call a man drunk, when he did not know if the man had been or not. He said he did not file it because he woke up sick. He said he seized sacks and almost lost himself at the smell of them, and set them down and left them with the mountain, and would fetch them with witnesses at full light. He did not furnish adjectives for himself. The justice supplied none. Rowan spoke last. She told them where the mare had been taken from, and why that mattered in a house where livestock said life or death. She told them what Preacher Finn had said on the ridge, and how the mountain had answered him by eating the path, not the man. She told them about the juniper hair, the inventory chit with RH on it, and a time 4 hours after Eli was supposed to have been dead, the oilskin sacks nest-feathered into a crack. She did not embellish. She did not use any word twice, if once would do. When she described the scraped line in the parish book, she did not look at Rourke. When she described the way Tavo went under the slab, she looked at the wall, because if she had looked at Jonah, she would have cried, and crying would make men in that room decide she was something besides what she was. Preacher Finn came in halfway through her words, and stood at the back with his hat in his hands, and the mud drying white on his boots. He listened, and the corners of his mouth learned they had been wrong all day. He lifted his eyes once when she described the boy she did not know the name of, his nephew, saved by Tavo's shove. He rubbed his thumb against his own fingernail, like a man trying to wipe off a stain that only he could see. He did not speak. He looked at Silas, who had come in after him and stood not near him. Silas smiled at the chit, like it was a dog he knew how to call. "This shows one thing only," Silas said when the justice gave him the chance. "It shows paperwork. That chit could have been carried by anyone. The poor woman misread something half wet in a storm, and here we all are with our pajamas on. My men tried to end a fire tonight, and this woman started one in my valley with words. I won't answer to it." Rowan did not turn to him. "I saw your boot print on the cache ledge," she said quietly, "with hobnails in the shape of a fish, and your sister's smaller boot beside it. I never stood in that ledge in my life until tonight, which makes the mark you left a gift to me. Thank you." Mags came in then, with her hair still wet, and her face still set, like a woman braced for a slap. She had the army sack that had torn, the one with the spilled teeth. She set it on the table beside the chit, and did not look at her brother because she did not know if her eyes would hold. "If you're going to hang me," she said to the justice, "hang me after you hang the right man, so I can watch." The room altered around her presence. It found a new angle to stand at. Silas called her name, and she did not answer. The justice leaned back and looked at nothing the room possessed. He had the look of a man who had eaten too much and now had to stand and sing. "We will reopen the inquest formally," he said, "at dawn." He looked around at the lamps and at the faces that wanted to be anywhere else. "It is near enough dawn as it is. We will call it now in the record, and save me the trouble of writing a second page." He took up Jonah's pen as if it were heavier than a gavel. "State for the reopened inquest that the deceased may not have been deceased at the time of the first inventory written by his hand, initialed R.H. He paused, and his voice lost some good oil, and scraped. "And state for the reopened inquest that a parish record was altered with cause stated, and that the sheriff prepared a deposition that he did not file, and now submits as evidence of his own failure. We will take sworn statements of all witnesses, and we will send notice to the army about their sacks." He glanced at Lattimore. "And we will bring the sacks in with the mountain watching," he said, a little wonder in his voice that he had said such a thing. Silas smiled the way bad weather smiles when a roof leaks. "You will find those sacks walked in the night," he said. "You will find men's memories are poor." "You'll find mine isn't," Jonah said, mild as bread. "I wrote the hour. I wrote where the sacks lay. I wrote where the moon was when we left them." He tapped his ledger. "You can argue with me, but not with paper," he said, and then looked at Father Rourke with a little sideways pain, not aimed to hurt, just to mark that men had tried arguing with paper tonight and lost. The meeting dissolved into the rustle of men putting their hands where they belonged. Some reached into their pockets for handkerchiefs. Some reached for hats. Some reached for the new part inside their chests that had not existed at sundown. Rowan led Ash back into the street and scratched the mare where the jaw rope rubbed, and the mare sighed and shook her skin from nose to tail in one long ripple that let the day go. Rowan turned her face up and let the first dry air since noon touch it. The sky above town held that weak blue that comes just before light takes itself seriously again. A hand touched her elbow, light as advice. Mags. Her eyes were big and old and tired. "He won't lose," Mags said, and it was not a threat. It was grief. "He doesn't know how. He'll set the valley to boiling and throw bones in to flavor it, if that's what it takes to call the stew his." "He will lose," Rowan said, and she meant it in a way that made the words sound like someone else's, someone stronger. "He will lose because the mountain said so tonight. He will lose because his boot prints can't lie for him. He will lose because men who didn't like themselves found other persons inside them by accident." She looked toward the ridge and saw, without seeing, the low shape of a man on a slab under a blanket. "He will lose because someone he could have killed chose to save a boy instead of himself." Mag swallowed and nodded once. "I put the money there," she said, too soft for anyone else, "because I needed somewhere to put what I had done. I am not brave, but I can carry." "Carry tomorrow," Rowan said. "Carry when we walk up with the sacks and the names." She put a hand on Mags's shoulder, a plain, workmanlike touch. "Eat something," she added, like a sister. The hour before light is when men like Silas sweat. He did not know why his shirt stuck to him when the air turned kind. He saddled a fresh horse with a speed that made the animal resent him. He told Boyle to find Preacher Finn and keep him close, though the words felt old by the time he said them. Finn seemed to have gone somewhere inside himself that did not return to hands quickly. Silas rode out not to the sacks, but to the river path that led under the cache ledge, because he wanted to control the underneath of the day, not the top. He had a coil of rope and a hook, and the strange idea that a man could fish for what stone keeps with a little iron and a lie. He did not see the runner on the rim watching him, the one Aunt Selina had sent with a mirror and a good memory. The sun came up with as little fuss as a clean baby. It painted wet rocks until they looked like they might be gold if you wanted them to be. The smell of old smoke thinned to something like a sermon you could bear to hear. Rowan walked up with Jonah and Lattimore and Father Rourke and the Justice and 6 men who liked to think of themselves as not cowards now that it was morning. Mags came because she had to. Preacher Finn came because he had followed Lattimore like a ghost. The young deputy came because his mouth had formed that we once and wanted to try it in daylight. Aunt Selina came a little way and then stopped where the old boundary stone marked the place where her people had once told themselves the game would still be there tomorrow if they did not take all of it today. She stood with her arms folded and the bridle hanging from her left forearm and did not try to make her face mild. The sacks were still where they had been left. The torn one had slumped another inch, but nothing had walked. Jonah spoke the hour on his tongue, and it matched his line. The Justice exhaled because something in him had expected the lie Silas promised, and had not wanted to go looking for it this early. They gathered the sacks and put them on a travois behind Ash, and the mare stood like an altar, and did not offer complaint, because this was weight she wanted. A shout came from the lower path, the kind of shout men make when a foot does not find what it had hoped. Silas had overreached his hook and tumbled into a pocket of rock where a little pool had made a fool of him. He came up spitting and furious, and aimed fury at the first thing that moved. It was not a person. It was the idea that the day had chosen a different ending for him. He clawed his way up the bank. He saw the procession on the upper path, the sacks, the justice, the mayor, the priest, the woman who had not run from him. He made a shape with his mouth and leaped for a shortcut he had no right to trust. His boot slipped, his knee hit a nut of stone, and he saw lights. And then he saw nothing, because seeing had stopped being useful when the mountain had already written the next line. He didn't fall to his death then. He caught himself. He hung a moment on a shrub that had no reason to hold him, and held him anyway, out of sheer shrub kindness. He dragged himself up and laughed once, something private, and cracked. He put a hand on the path, and a runner's foot came down on it, not to crush, just to let him feel how small his hold was. The runner bent and said in a voice without anger, "Go home," and lifted his foot. Silas went home because gravity is home to everyone eventually. He slid down 3 body lengths and came to rest alive and angrier. He went to his horse and got on it and rode away in the way men who think leave, convinced they have only decided to be elsewhere, not been sent. Rowan did not watch him. She walked with Ash steady and let the day be the day. She was tired under her skin, and she was not done. Back in the square, the justice signed 3 papers, like a man carving his name into a doorframe his grandchildren would touch. He affixed his wax seal and gave 1 copy to Lattimore, and 1 to Jonah, and 1 to Rowan, because he could not think of another right place for it. She folded it around the chit and tucked both into a pocket she tied shut with a little knot Aunt Selina had taught her when they were barefoot children and stealing chokecherries. Father Rourke stood with his book shut and his head bare, and the wind opened a path across his scalp that felt like a hand. "I will copy the page back the way it was," he said. "Then I will give the book to Jonah for a day. I would like not to have it touch me while the ink dries." "Bring it to my shop," Jonah said. "I will put it somewhere that doesn't shake." A soldier came at noon. He wore blue and had that tent and coffee look, a man who has slept in sudden places. He had orders from the quartermaster asking after sacks. He had a list, and he had a good mouth for numbers. He looked at the sacks, and at the woman, and at the sheriff, and at the undertaker, and at the priest, and at the justice, and at the book, and at the chit, and each time he looked, he adjusted slightly in his boots, as if sand had given way, and then firmed. He took statements, and wrote them down, because someone had trained him to write what he was told, when it made sense. "We will want the man who took them," he said finally. "We want him too," Lattimore said, and it did not hurt his throat to say it this time. "We will go get him." Mags looked down the street where her brother had disappeared, and did not try to make her face mean anything polite. She turned to Rowan and offered a small parcel wrapped in tight cloth. "His seal," she said, "and a letter he made me write and not send. It says things he won't say out loud. Maybe they help, maybe they burn." She pressed the parcel into Rowan's hands and did not ask for it back. Rowan took it and did not look inside. "We'll use what helps," she said. "We'll feed the fire what should burn." She looked toward the ridge where the burial cave breathed cool air and imaginations, and she remembered how Tavo's face had gone slack and then sharpened, and how men who were not brave had found one brave minute. She put her hand on Ash's neck, and the mare bumped her shoulder with the soft of her nose, and the day leaned a fraction toward forgiveness. By evening, Tavo had woken twice and said 2 foolish things, once about a goat that had stolen his hat, and once about bread so fresh it had sung when he split it. Aunt Selina declared both to be medicine working. She told him the leg would carry him if he did not ask too much, and if he did ask too much it would remind him, with language he could not ignore. He smiled and slept again, and his hand found the bridle without his eyes, and rested there, as if plugging himself back into a wall. Rowan stood in the doorway of the cave as the sky turned that metal color the San Juan likes before night, when everything looks hammered and made by someone you won't meet. She listened to the wind count slow, and she spoke one line, not to anyone, but to the thing that keeps records, whether men write them down or not. Keep watching. Before this night is over, we will open a coroner's inquest that names a living man among the dead, and one erased line in the parish register will be read out loud the way it was first written. Then she stepped back into the house the old ones had built and laid her palm against the bridle and felt the old story hold. Outside, down in town, Jonah Pike bent over his ledger and wrote a margin line that would make sense in a week to any man who read it. A boy saved by a man who owed him nothing. A mountain that balanced a book. The day after the storm tasted of iron and wet stone. The air had that scraped clean sound a valley holds when thunder has argued itself hoarse. Rowan woke in the dark belly of the old house and felt the cave breathing slow, the way a safe room breathes. Ash nosed her shoulder and snorted once like a question. Tavo slept with the bridle under his fingers as if someone might steal it while his eyes were shut, and Aunt Selina dozed seated, chin tipped to chest. A woman who had learned to rest without ever truly arriving at sleep. Rowan slid to her feet and took the oil-stained chit from her pocket and held it up to the thin seam of light edging the doorway. It was exactly what it had been in the night. A small paper with a man's careful block, initials that refused to be anything else, a time that did not belong to death. She tucked it away and tied the pocket closed with a small left-handed knot she could untie even with cold fingers. She stepped outside, and the morning met her face like a cool cloth laid over heat. Down in town, the justice had pinned notices to the door with tin tacks. Inquest reconvened, deposition to be read, parish register to be shown, witnesses called. The words sat stiff on the page like a lawman's mustache. Men read them with lips moving, and women read them with their mouths closed and their hands opening and closing where no one could see. Sheriff Lattimore walked the length of the porch with his hat in his hand and his badge polished so bright it looked like a new coin. He did not feel new. He felt like a man who had walked 3 miles with a stone in his boot, taken the stone out, and still felt it, because feet remember. Silas had slept none and ridden much. He had ridden to the combine house and found his father's old ledger and thumbed the pages a while and told himself names were just ink. He had ridden to the ravine and glared into it as if the hole in the world could be shamed into giving something back. He had ridden to the place on the ridge where a girl and a boy had dared each other into a chute 15 years ago, because spite takes you to old places when you can't think of new. He had finally ridden to town, because pride likes an audience. He dismounted at the far end of the street where a man can arrive without arriving. He watched Rowan walk with Ash at her hip and watched men's eyes go to the mare and then to the woman and then to the paper wrapped neat in her pocket. He smiled because he still believed he could write an ending by will. Preacher Finn kept to the shade under the eaves of the livery and touched his nephew's hair as the boy passed, the one Tavo had dragged from under falling stone. The boy flinched and then stood still, like a colt being taught to accept a hand. You breathe, Finn told him. You say thank you to the person you owe, not to God, not today. The boy nodded and did not know where to take that thanks, and Finn pointed with his chin toward the ridge and said, later, because some debts are paid by walking better from then on. The inquest reconvened with the room full in a way rooms get full when weather has run out of excuses. Jonah Pike set his ledger down and laid his palm on it like he could feel a pulse. Father Rourke placed the parish register on the table and did not attempt to smooth the page that had been scraped. The scratch under the paper was thicker than the scratch in it. The justice cleared his throat and called the room to order, and for once, the room complied. Lattimore stood straight and kept his eyes on the middle distance where nothing could accuse him except his own recollection. Mags leaned against a back wall and let the wood hold her up. Her hands were empty because she had given all the right things away. Rowan stood where every man could see her and every woman could measure her, and she did not lower her eyes or her chin. Jonah read first, again, because the dead do better when the undertaker speaks for them. He read without ornament, without apology, without pause, where a man might have thought to spare another. He traced the pencil under the ink with the pad of his finger, and men leaned closer, because even if they could not see the graphite, they wanted to be near a hand that admitted it. He read the margin line he had put down in the night, the one about the witness who signed from 2 places at once, and when Boyle flinched like a dog that has heard its name in an angry room. Jonah did not look up. He read the time, the weather, the way copper smells when a storm is near, and he read the sentence that said, too clean like it had never been written before. Father Rourke opened his book and did not put a finger on the scraped place. He let it be a wound uncovered. I wrote murder, he said to the room, and the room pulled its shoulders up and then let them down, because the word had finally been said. I wrote it the night the woman brought me news of her husband, and I wrote it Because I had eyes before fear. I scraped it out before dawn. That was a sin I can name, and a reason I cannot excuse. I am telling you because paper has to have a mouth sometimes. He closed the book gently and stood back as if the pages were a person now. Sheriff, the justice said. Lattimore placed the unfiled deposition on the table and pressed it flat, the way men smooth a letter after they've crumpled it with a thought. I wrote that Eli Hale was a known drunk, he said. I wrote it because Silas Corcoran told me, and because it would make my job easy if it were true. I didn't know it, and wrote it anyway. I did not file it. I am filing it now, not to accuse him, but to accuse me. The room heard the small word, me, and let it move around among its ribs. Some of the men found they could breathe deeper after. Rowan was the last voice again. She repeated the things that were only ever going to be true once. She repeated them plainly. She put the chit on the table and let it sit between two lamplight pools until every eye had looked at it long enough to feel personal. When she finished, the justice nodded and said, "So entered," in a tone that had not belonged to him yesterday. Silas stepped forward then, as if he had been called. He had not. He took off his hat with a flourish he had saved from better nights. "You make a page sing," he told Jonah. "You make guilt into a poem," he told the priest. "You make yourself into a martyr," he told the sheriff. "You make rocks into judges," he told Rowan. "But you don't have me." He put both hands on the table and leaned. "You have a chit that could have been written by anyone, and a sack any idiot could have torn, and a storm story," he said. "You have gossip made fancy. I have land and men and ink enough to drown you all." Rowan let him talk until his sentences began to repeat their own steps. Then she said, "Quiet. Take your boot off." He blinked and tilted his head like she had spoken in another tongue. "Take your boot off," she said again. "The right. Show them the hobnails in the shape of a fish." She didn't look away from him. When she said fish, she watched the little tendons in his jaw choose. He did not bend. He smiled. He said, "No woman shops my shoes." And the room believed him in a way that wasn't good for him. "Go show them," Mag said from the back, and her voice had weight now. "Or explain why you won't." She did not wait. She pushed off the wall and crossed the floor, like a person who had learned how to walk without apologizing. She grabbed her brother's right ankle, and he let her, because he could not see what to do that wouldn't make him smaller in front of men. She yanked the boot half off, and he jerked and swore. She yanked again, and the boot came away, and she flipped it sole up in her hands. The hobnails shone in a little pattern. Some cobbler had taught himself that summer. A fish with its head toward the toe, two eyes of bright steel. Men leaned forward so fast their chairs creaked. Silas moved then in the only direction left to him, out. He shoved his sister so hard she hit the door jamb and caught herself with a palm that would bruise in a fan. He ran, and running made him common. It undid some magic he had believed about himself. Lattimore shouted once and gave chase with two men, and Jonah did not run, because undertakers don't. Father Rourke did by accident, and stopped himself halfway out the door, because his knees did not care for sudden justice. Rowan was already outside because she had been waiting for where the next step lived. She swung onto Ash without thought, and the mare gathered under her like a promise delivered. They needed no spur. They needed direction. The ridge gave it. Silas hit the low road, and then the high, because the low road belongs to mules, and the high belongs to men who dare. He chose dare. He had ridden that shelf since boyhood, and he trusted his horse more than he trusted the day. He did not look back enough. Rowan did not look forward too hard. She looked where the rock asked her to. She let Ash pick the first teeth of the climb, and then pointed with her knees at the crack that would save them 2 breaths later. She heard Lattimore and 2 others behind, their horses doing their honest best. She heard mirror stamps ahead, faint as thought. Tavo's people had seen everything. The mountain watched itself through. Their little lights. Halfway up, the wind rose with a familiar shiver that made Rowan's scalp tighten and told her thunder wanted one last say. It would be a small storm, a reprise, the way a drunk comes back to the door to say one more thing and finds the latch has been set. Silas pushed his horse harder than he should. The animal scrambled, saved itself, resented him, held anyway. Rowan kept Ash right where breath and balance stay married. She felt the mare falter, once at a slick seam, and she loosened her knees and put a palm flat to the neck, and the animal remembered everything it needed to. Silas reached the rib, where shale pretends to be floor and proves itself roof. He stood in his stirrups and looked down his nose at the valley, at the town, at the little square of courthouse roof where men had sat. He looked upward, at the next narrow, one he had ridden with his father when he was 12 and had promised himself places. He heard behind him the hooves of a mare and the breath of a woman and the quiet of resolve. He grinned and spoke over his shoulder without turning. "Come take your paper," as if a line like that could rot the edge of a stone. He kicked forward, and the rib said no. It did not say it with malice. It said no, like an old animal says no when a boy wants to ride beyond the pasture. The shale sloughed just where the leading hoof wanted it to hold. The horse lost one purchase, found another, lost the second, because iron hates angles. Silas threw his weight into his right stirrup, and that was the wrong thing. The gelding tried to live beneath him as horses do. It gave every muscle to that try. Hoof lost, then found, then lost again. Silas reached for the wall and found nothing. Where he had expected a hand's worth of friction, there was a skin of recent rain and man sweat. The world tipped. The horse tried one last brave tuck and almost saved them both. The stirrup leather snapped with a sound like a neck under a doctor's hands. The saddle slewed. Silas fell not far, not at first. He slid. His palms squealed against stone. He caught a shrub and hung. He was not yet a dead man. He could have become one more slowly, with more remorse to show. He looked up. Rowan was there, reins loose, mare steady, hand empty. "Help," he said, and the word came thinner than he would have wanted. Rowan did not move for one breath, because one breath is where a life weighs itself. She saw in his eyes not just the man who had taken and lied, but the boy whose boot had first been stamped with a fish by a cobbler, the son who had learned that land means power, and power means never saying please. She saw Mags's hands lifting sacks that were heavier than shame, and a priest scraping a word, and a sheriff writing one he didn't mean. She saw Tavo under a rock, telling her to dig where it kissed him. She dug in herself, where the story kissed. "Let go," she said. He stared, not understanding. "Take my hand," he said. "Jumper quick." "Let go," she said again. "With the left. You'll swing and catch the next root with your right. There's another there." She spoke calm, as a person telling a child to jump into a pond. "If you grab me, we both go." He looked where she looked. The next root was there. He could not see it until she said it, but once she said it, there it was. He licked his lips. He looked at her hand. He looked at the root. He let go with his left. He reached with his right. He missed, because fear makes hands stupid. He scrabbled. He found only air. The shrub tore half out with his weight, and then did not tear the rest of the way, because shrubs have pride. He hung again, lower, more crooked, hat askew, mouth open. The mountain waited, patient as a judge with all the time. "Again," Rowan said. "This time don't look at me. Look at what can hold you." He swore her name like a curse and like a prayer. He tried. He reached, and this time he did not waste his eyes. He found the root, and then his boot slipped, and then all of him did. The mountain kept him exactly as long as a fair place keeps a cheat. Then it let him go. He did not fall forever. That's a comfort books make. He dropped enough to write an ending you could point to. He hit an outcrop, broke something that made him holler, slid another span, then came to rest in a cradle of rock and scrub that did him no favor, but did not murder him. He lay there, and panted and cursed and laughed once at the cold joke of it, and the laugh sounded like someone else's coming out of his mouth. Rowan did not cheer. She did not weep. She breathed, and let Ash breathe, and felt the mare's ribs move, and knew their movement better than she knew any man's. Lattimore reached them with his men, in the time it takes a story to decide on its last paragraph. He dismounted clumsily, because his knees wanted to be two different ages, and he scrambled down the safer line with a rope and attached it to the surest piece of shrub available, a scientific study of luck. He went to Silas and put irons on him, with the kindly efficiency of a man writing a last appointment in a book. "You're under arrest for murder," he said, plain. Silas laughed again, and spat, and said a word that hates women and men both. Lattimore didn't answer it. He looked up at Rowan. She nodded once. A small, sober yes. He hauled Silas up with help, and hauled the day with him. Back in town, the justice wrote the charge and read it, and the room admitted the sound of that reading into itself. Mags stood and did not faint, though no one would have blamed her. She looked at her brother, and he looked away, because there is a place even bad men do not like their sisters to see. Preacher Finn took his nephew outside to make the boy swallow air until he believed in lungs again. Father Rourke copied the page he had scraped, letter for letter, and did not scrape this time. He drew a line through the scraped place in the old page and wrote in his careful hand above it, "Amended for truth." He dated it. He signed it. He took off his collar for an hour and laid it on a chair, and no one told him to put it back on. When he did, at dusk, it looked right again. Jonah wrote his last line of the day. It did not name Silas. It named the mountain. It said, in that tidy hand that had never wavered for blood or wind, the mountain kept its own and returned what was not its to keep. Ledger balanced. He closed the book and put the blotter on it and sat a while and listened to the house settling around him like a person deciding to sleep. 2 days later, a letter came from the army with a seal like a hard eye. It asked for the payroll and gave no thanks. It asked for the names and gave no counsel. It asked for punishment and did not care which county supplied it, so long as a page could be sent back with words under numbers accounted for. Rowan read it with the justice and with Lattimore, and then took it up to the cliff houses where Aunt Selina held warm rocks to Tavo's leg and told him stories that kept him still. Rowan handed her the letter, and Aunt Selina did not read English and did not need to. She held the paper and weighed it between finger and thumb, like a woman measuring out lard. "Give back what is theirs," she said. "Keep what is ours. Feed the rest to the fire." She passed the letter to Tavo, and he grinned crooked, because pain makes grins odd, and said, "Rabbit?" And Aunt Selina snorted and said, "If you can catch him sitting down." And the bridle on the peg Flash smiled when the light shifted. They took the sacks down with witnesses and counted them out under the army man's watching, and the army man checked numbers and did not say thank you, and Jonah did not expect him to. They sealed the sacks with wax and tied them with string and watched a blue-coated back ride away, with the day's decency balanced on a mule's spine. The mule didn't care. It put one foot in front of the other, the way justice should, and that was enough to make a person love a mule. Silas waited for trial in a cell with a window that let in a mean slice of sky. He did not pray. He kicked the cot once and hurt his foot and did not make that mistake again. He thought of a woman's voice telling him to look away from her and toward a root, and he could not decide if that had been mercy or hate. He slept finally, because bodies do that, whether men deserve it or not. Lattimore sat 2 doors down at a desk that had belonged to 3 sheriffs before him and wrote copies for the circuit judge and did not embellish or excuse. He kept a lamp low and went home in the dark and slept an hour and got up and walked the street until the dawn decided it was allowed to start. Rowan put the mare back in the little pasture that had survived the hayfire, like a heart that keeps beating after a shock. Ash grazed and flicked her ears and looked at Rowan with that sideways softness that belongs only to old partners. Rowan leaned her shoulder against the fence post and let her head rest there, and for a minute she felt the old sorrow like a river under ice, and the new resolve like a bridge. She went inside and opened Mags's parcel at last. The seal stamped with the fish broke clean under her thumbnail. The letter inside had been written by Mags and dictated by Silas weeks earlier. It was all threats and silk words and numbers, a blueprint for a theft dressed up as a grievance. There was a second sheet Mags had added without his asking. It said, in a small script that hurried in places where her heart outran her hand, "I am sorry for my share. I can carry what needs carrying. Tell me how." Rowan folded that sheet small and kept it under a cup on her table. She took the other sheet to Jonah and said, "Add this to whatever keeps men honest." And he slid it into a folder with his undertaker's exactitude, as if shame were an object one could catalogue, like coffin screws. On the third evening, the sky went clear from one edge to the other, and the wind forgot to be anyone's enemy. Aunt Selina came down to the square with Tavo on a pole stretcher between two runners, who moved like men carrying a favorite table. He grinned at Rowan with the kind of grin that comes after a person has argued with rock and lived to shake hands. "You run like a goat," he told her. "I forgive you." "You forgive me," she said, and laughed full for the first time since summer. "That's rich." He shrugged and winced and shrugged again, with the other shoulder, because pain teaches balance. The justice spoke to the square, because the square had earned words it understood. He said the pages had been set right, and would be sent to the judge, and men would wait, and the waiting would taste like ash, and coffee, and anger, and in the meantime, the valley would not burn if they kept their matches to themselves. Father Rourke read a psalm that did not apologize for anger. Lattimore did not make a speech. He leaned to the young deputy and said, "Good," and that boy stood 2 inches taller forever after. Preacher Finn took his nephew's hand and placed it in Tavo's, and the boy said, "Thank you," and Tavo said, "Don't make me do it again," and the boy nodded with the gravity of a man being sworn. When the crowd thinned to only people who cared enough to linger, Rowan stepped forward like a runner to a line no one else could see. She lifted the oil-stained chit once more, so anyone left who had not yet looked could finish their looking. "This is the piece that named time," she said. "It made liars out of men who needed to be called that. The ledger wrote the rest. The register did the hard thing and admitted the first thing. That's how it goes. One page tells on another until the book makes sense." She let the chit fall back against her chest, and the paper warmed to her skin again and learned its place. She did not look at the camera. The world sometimes is. She spoke as if to the mountain, and if the mountain carried the words anywhere else, that was its business. "Keep watching," she said inside the sentence that closed her mouth. "Before this is truly closed, Jonah Pike will add one more margin line, and when you read it, you will see why the last blank space in the parish register had to stay empty until now." That night, Jonah sat again with his lamp behaving itself and his pen doing as it was told. He turned to the inquest page and added, in the margin where men's eyes fall last and remember longest, "Woman outran horse on shale, horse outran lie, lie outran nothing, truth arrived on foot." He sanded it, blue, and closed the ledger with the small, respectful click a craftsman gives his own best box. He wiped his pen on cloth and put the cloth away, unwashed, so the ink would witness the ink. Snow came early on the ridges. It came on cat feet, and then on boot heels, and then in a full march. Rowan walked out to the fence and held her palm to the first flakes like a child. Ash puffed at them and found them boring, and then found them nice, and then went back to grass. Tavo practiced standing with a brace and told his leg out loud that it would run again, and promised to listen when it complained. Aunt Selina hung the bridle in a higher place and tied a sprig of sage to it so winter would smell like stories instead of just like cold. The letter from the army went off in a courier's bag, and men cheered, not for the army, but because watching a mule carry away trouble is good for the mind. Silas slept and woke and learned what men learn when 4 walls teach. He was one body in a world that did not care for his constant claims. He stared through the little window at the blue slice and remembered being a boy and putting one finger in a creek to change it and learning that water has no patience for fingers. He did not repent. He remembered. Sometimes that's all men manage. Rowan saddled Ash at dawn. On a day the air smelled tin-bright with cold. She packed only what fit in a flour sack and left the door on the latch, the way people do when they intend to return, but do not want to make a promise to the house. She touched the post by the gate, where Eli had once carved their initials badly, and smiled, because she had loved him, and that did not stop being true, because other truths had arrived. She rode to the cliff house with a rabbit in her game bag, because Aunt Selina had asked, and because bringing meat after death and fire feels like right arithmetic. She found Tavo outside practicing standing without the brace, and she laughed at him and handed him the rabbit, and he laughed at himself and took it as if it were a gift larger than it was. They ate. They spoke little. They made plans that were simple, because simple ones live. She would ride to the agency with the justice's papers and the army's receipt. She would return with what could be returned and leave what had to be left. She would pick up Jonah's copy of the inquest and Father Rourke's amended page and tie them in oilcloth and keep them where rain could not read them. She would stop on the ridge and let her breath make clouds and tell the mountain thank you with silence. She mounted, and Ash turned her head to look at her with one eye, the way horses do when they want to be sure they understand the day. Home, Rowan said, and then corrected herself, because home had changed shape. Out and back, she said, and the mare flicked her ear. Agreeable. Rowan looked down at Aunt Selina and Tavo, and the old wall and the bridle where the blue beads held light like a small contained sky. She felt grief and gratitude hard enough to be kin. She breathed. She rode. The mountain let her pass, as if it had made the trail for her bones. The wind carried no messages this time, but did not turn its back either. Below, the river took no side, and did its job with the same patience it had shown when it chewed the drowned wagon wheel and spat it out whole. Above, a raven rode the pale sun in small, complicated circles, and looked exactly like a scout doing a scout's work. In town, Jonah set his ledger, where the winter would not warp it, and Father Rourke re-sewed the parish register's torn binding and left one line open, blank, and honest, because truth sometimes needs a place to land next time. Sheriff Lattimore set his chair with its back to the jail wall and closed his eyes for a minute, like a man who had earned noon. If the ledger speaks again, you'll know which page to open first.